Hello, everyone. Thanks to the webinar on how L&D can create a high-performing Agile workforce. Hopefully, this is the webinar you were hoping to attend and register for, because that's where you are today. We're a couple minutes early, about 4 or 5 minutes early. We'll get started right at, let's say, 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thanks all for joining early. We really appreciate it. Hold by. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar on how we can create a high-performing Agile workforce. We're going to get started in just 2 minutes. Thanks for standing by. All right, thanks everyone for joining our webinar on how L&D can create a high-performing Agile workforce. We have quite a few people joining in right now, so we're going to give just another 30 seconds before we start. Let those people end their last meeting and join this meeting. Thanks for standing by. I promise we'll get started here in just a minute. All right, everyone, thanks for joining us today. We have a lot of people joining in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for those that came early. Thanks for those that are joining us today. We have an excellent webinar in store for you today. We're going to be talking about how L&D can create a high-performing Agile workforce, which is just so important for us, as we all know today. We're going to cover a lot of different topics in here. What is Agile? Why is it important for us today? How does Agile differ from what we're doing traditionally? What are some steps that we can take to become more agile? Like today, you can leave this webinar with do these things, and you will. I mean, I shouldn't say your workforce will become agile, but you'll be taking steps in the right direction. We will also be having a Q&A. We'll be checking those periodically, but please don't be alarmed if we don't get to your answer. We're intended for this webinar to be highly conversational, so at the end or throughout, we'll check through the questions and make sure we try to get to every single one. For those that haven't used GoToWebinar yet, the tool is designed mostly for a one-way, and unfortunately, if you have any questions, you can find those in the question pane off to the right-hand side. If you have a comment you want to leave for me or our organization, please do so as well. The first question I get asked every single time, are we going to record this webinar and will it be presented? Absolutely, we will send out a recording to everybody at the end, usually 2 to 3 days or so afterwards. So beginning of next week, look out for that webinar recording. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. A tiny bit, this is the only slide about us, so please forgive that. Infopro Learning, who is this company that put on this webinar? I mean, there's a lot, I guess, to take in on this slide. Most recently, just I guess 3 weeks ago or so, we were awarded 24 Brandon Hall Excellence Awards for our work in really so many different aspects. And that's really what our company is all about. We are a full service learning organization covering your entire organization from strategy, design, delivery, execution, measurement, analytics, and the full, everything in between. One particular thing I'm just gonna mention, not I guess as a sales pitch, but if anybody is out there and they're one of the big challenges that a lot of our clients have today is hiring. If you're looking for good resources, please let us know. We have a very vast pool in our talent pool of resources that are coming on the market now, just as kind of the cycles change. Write us an email. I'll put, we can go to our site and find our information there. You can write to info@Infopro Learning. If you are looking for some talent, we'd be happy to send you some resumes and profiles. Now that the sales pitch is out of the way, let's handle a quick introduction. Me, I'm the gentleman on the right. My name is Nolan, Vice President here at Infopro Learning. Been in this space for over a decade now. I'm focused in marketing, but really have extensive experience in a lot of different components in our learning space. As many know, the line between, marketing and learning is kind of merging as everybody is after that engagement. And so a lot of what I do is focus not just on our company, but help other clients to understand how do we engage with our employees better. Joining me today as our special guest, we have Rob Lauber, the founder of Ex-CLO Global. He is a fractional CLO for us. He is the ex-CLO of McDonald, Yum Brands, Singular Wireless. He was the CLO of the year. Too many accolades to really mention for Rob, but he's been in this space for 30 years. Really, his expertise lies in working with people that are trying to structure their L&D organization in a way, specifically larger organizations, as Rob has primarily worked with some of these bigger organizations, and really helping them strategize the best way to hit their goals, their big, audacious goals. So happy to have Rob with us on the call today. To start off with, we're just going to cover what is Agile. Now, the definition from the book, The Agile Manifesto, it's the ability to adapt and respond to change. Agile organizations view change as an opportunity, not a threat. And it's really the ability to adapt and respond to change. And we can see there at the bottom, when an organization works towards altering the direction quickly to operate successfully in an unprecedented situation, it's the mark of an agile workforce. Agile teams respond quickly to changing needs of customers, marketplace, products, employees. So here's a general overview of what agile means. Rob, how do you see agile? When somebody asks you, how do I make my L&D organization more agile? What do you usually respond with as far as like what that goal actually means?
Yeah, I think these, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and happy to be here, Nolan. I think, when I look at this definition about the ability to adapt and respond to change, I think that that's what I think about an organization from an agile perspective. I think for me, though, it's more about readiness to change. So, and preparation to change and sort of built for change, I guess I would say. So, adapting and responding to change is something that, companies have had to do for, hundreds of years, right, as technology has advanced and everything else. So in theory, we should have been talking about agile hundreds of years ago. But I think the pace is different. And I think now it's about how do you have a culture of change in your organization where people are ready to pivot at all times and at any time when when a need arises for the organization to pivot.
Yeah, and I spoke to a gentleman who leads a learning organization in Texas, a big financial firm, and he had said that what he's hoping to do in this transformation is he wants his company to, he's like, originally, and of course the goal is to be able to respond quickly, but the future state for me is that we don't just respond to competitors, we're actually responding to the market so that we can be the innovators, and actually drive. And so I think a lot of times when we look at agility, a lot of this is the ability to respond. But I think really the desire of the business today and most leaders is the ability to be so agile that you're recognizing the trends and the changes in the market to use that as an innovation versus just, oh, my competitor did this, now I need to adapt and keep up with the Joneses.
Right. Yeah.
So when we look at agility, I thought it would be helpful. I thought Accenture, in their Partners with Solutions IQ, did an amazing job of kind of defining what I would call types of agility. If you speak to a person in IT as an example, and you say, what does it mean to be agile? Well, they're going to go right into, well, are you Scrum certified? Are you managing all your projects with agile framework and methodologies? And so it's very much a science, of how that is. But if you ask the CEO, is your organization agile? It means something completely different than that. And so I thought it would be, important to showcase the different types of agility. So, are leaders agile? Speaking to kind of what I was talking about, last time, is the culture able to respond quickly? Is our organization, how quickly can our organization move? Although we're some huge organization, can we still pivot and change to customer demands quickly, or does it take us a long time? How innovative are we? Are customers driving our innovation? Are we responding to customer needs, or are we sticking internally and moving? Are we just running the playbook that we decided on at the beginning of the year? Were we listening to how customers are interpreting what we do and changing throughout? And then the fourth one is delivery agility, which is usually what comes to mind for a lot of people when they hear agility, which is, okay, am I delivering products quicker? Am I delivering them better? Am I able to do less change requests? Is the feedback loop shorter than waiting to the end and then putting it in? So there's four main buckets there for agility. And so
Yeah.
why do we go to agile? Like why do we even care? Obviously, you're on the webinar today, so I'm not gonna spend time talking about all four of these because you have your own reason for why you wanted to be agile. Rob, when in your experience and in working with a lot of leaders, many of our clients and some of your own, what do you see? What buckets are you finding? What is driving this need for agility today versus maybe 5 years ago?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because a lot of information I've looked at from a study in 2014 about what the organizational agility looks like. And, so it's not really a new topic. I think what's different now is that it's been pushed to the top of the agenda because of what happened in the pandemic, where organizations, I call it sort of forced innovation, right? Where no one can come into work. So how are you going to function as a business? right? Those kind of disruptions, I think, really drove organizations to realize that they need to think differently about how they operate, and they need to think differently about what might be out there that they can't see. So how do you be prepared for basically the things that you can't necessarily see, that you can't necessarily anticipate on that? And so some of that, I think, is, a lot of these buckets in terms of an evolving environment, endless disruption of technology, acceleration, and I think acceleration's probably a theme across all of these pieces, right? The constantly evolving environment. If you go back 25, 30 years even, when I got my first desktop computer in my office, right, that was a big change. But what it started was this acceleration of the business overall in its ability to communicate, and its ability to do business, and its ability to move. And I think that means that the business environment is changing rapidly now, probably more rapidly than ever, and that's really not going to let up. So these traditional models that we have around hierarchy and flow of information and structure, I think, are really forcing us to really think differently about how we operate. And that's, Agile's been the term that's coined to it. I think these are four good drivers. There's lots of other ones as well, in terms of a business market that might appear and then disappear in a year or two. Those types of things as well. All are driving us to be able to move and pivot faster and faster.
Yeah, and the one that to me that is the most interesting one is the Agile's role in talent, because I guess it's the one that I think about the least. But as I really learn more about agility, and it's just understanding how I can get work done in different ways. And there's actually, talent out there that likes to work that way. They like to be highly agile. They're fine, in a gig economy, and they can do great work for 3 months and then be done for 9 months or whatever it is. And so for me, that's always something that I have my mind, open to is, well, God, how do I manage, because I have a problem, which is managing the demand of the business with the supply of full-time resources, right? And if I have too many full-time resources and then the demand drops off the cliff, I'm stuck holding a big cost center. And so that's one for me where I think it's somewhat of a win-win, is there's now more agile talent than ever. And companies, like us, are creating solutions for this agile talent. So I think that one's super fascinating to me.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think there's gosh, we could probably spend the next hour unpacking that, and we will, because we get around L&D and its impact. And this is really in the war for talent. But I think the theme around all of it is sort of the breakdown of the traditional structures. You have more,
Correct.
you have the Great Resignation's a good example, where people are quitting to find other opportunities elsewhere. I think a large part of that is because they see a future somewhere else, or they're a little bit burned out on what it is that they are doing. So they want to create their own agility and find something new and something different to do. I think that is a sort of an outcropping of this need to sort of change the way we think about work, and change the way we think about structures, and change the way we think about talent in the organization.
Absolutely. So Rob, we've kind of covered, I guess, the environment of Agile at this point. The why, what it is, and why you need it, and now, if you could, I think it's really important to look at, okay, so when we say Agile, what does that mean in the work? What does it actually look like? So can you help us maybe set the stage with, the next couple slides, and take us through what the change of an Agile organization looks like versus let's call it a traditional organization, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny, because this is a model that I use and talk a lot about when it comes to agility, because I think it simplifies how a lot of organizations work, and it's definitely a simplification, for sure. But if you think about the typical cycle of a business in terms of the way it operates, it sets a strategy, it communicates it, it embeds and reinforces it. It thinks about, how do I get more efficient at it and grow it, and then something comes along and disrupts it. And Agile comes into play where organizations are unable to kind of move from their business strategy to a new business strategy, you know, and it basically results in a loss of market share. So organizations become less relevant if they're unable to pivot off their original business strategy and move their organization to where it's going. And we can all think of companies out there that have had this problem, like Blockbuster and others, that had a business strategy on videotape rentals and didn't see digital coming, or saw digital coming but couldn't move its organization from one business strategy to a different business strategy, couldn't articulate it or couldn't communicate it, couldn't get people to move in that particular direction, and kind of held on to what it was. So I think what happens is the slower the cycle of change in a business, the harder it actually is to change, because of these activities in the organization around how you communicate the strategy for the business, and then how you organize and structure your business around the strategy, right? And then how you begin to embed, which is a lot where learning and development comes into play, reinforce, which is where your compensation and your talent attraction and everything else comes into play. Efficiency and growth are where your operations or your sales team come into play. So when you think about it and you set a business strategy, everything gets organized around it and everyone gets organized around it. When it gets disrupted, everyone in the organization needs to think differently about, okay, now how do I unwind everything I was just doing and move on to the next business strategy? And often organizations get stuck, and I think that's where agility is really the source of the, becomes the topic of the conversation, is how do we get unstuck as quickly as possible when looking at, this type of piece that's going on in the organization, where all of these things need to sort of change before the next disruption happens. And if you're unable to change over time, you're going to continually lose market share, and ultimately it becomes a threat to the business. So I think that's what I was trying to reinforce in the slide. Ironically, it's something somebody from Anderson Consulting back in the 90s talked to me about when we were talking actually about change management. Agile's probably the new description for it, but I think that the acceleration piece of this, the faster it happens, the faster organizations seem to be able to change. The slower it happens, the harder it is for organizations to change.
Yeah. So shortening the feedback loop, right, between the strategy and the change. How do you shorten that feedback loop?
Yeah, and disruption can be the intelligence of the leadership organization to recognize that the path is going to end, or that the path needs to pivot, right? Or it's it's the pandemic, and suddenly we all have to work from home when our entire business strategy, organization, embedding, reinforcing, and everything else has been built around an office mindset.
Yep, absolutely.
So I think there's a couple things here. When I talked about a report I've been looking at. I4CP is a member organization, and I do some work with them and participate a lot in their Chief Learning and Talent Officer board. And they've done a lot of studies and have a lot of good examples of companies about what they do in order to stay agile. And here's 3 of them that really stand out. And this is from their study, the 3 A's of organizational agility, right? They anticipate, so they look ahead and expect that they're going to be disrupted. And that they believe that it's manageable. So I think that's one of those, if you think you can, you can kind of thinking to it. Second thing they do is really adapt, and that is that from an organization perspective, one of the findings, for example, is that these organizations tend to be more decentralized, believe it or not, but focus on the flow of communication across the organization. So that disruption can happen naturally, and pivot can happen where it needs to faster in organizations. So their ability to adapt has to do with how they break down these rigid silos. So if you think about that previous slide I showed you, over time those pieces become hard cement in organizations. And I think versus say flexible rubber tubing. And so I think that the rigid silos and hierarchies piece is really important piece around adaptation in an organization, as well as, particularly to this audience, the notion of an organization that thinks about and values and has a culture of continuous learning. right? Because the continuous learning mindset is super important for people to be able to sit there and say, well, what I'm doing is not really relevant anymore. I should move on to this next thing. Gosh, I don't really know how to do it. I better go learn and do it. Learn how to do it. And that's, that sort of proactive mindset becomes really important here in the adaptation piece. And then the third piece is act, and that's pretty obvious, and that is that the organization is really comfortable with restructuring itself on a regular basis. And we can talk about burnout, and we can talk about a lot of other things associated with that. But organizations that are really successful and anticipate, adapt, and then act are organizations where people tend to thrive because it becomes less about a hierarchy. That hierarchy actually gets minimized, and more about empowerment for teams that are, closer to decision making or closer to customer impact, say, to actually make decisions and get things done. And that's a really super important piece of organizations where many of us in the organization need to be sort of unleashed to be able to drive agility where we need to.
Yeah, I heard the CEO of Google, and I always forget his name for whatever reason, but he was doing an interview with somebody, and they had asked, it makes me think about it when it comes to the acting point, as he said, I think so many times in my career, I was afraid to act because I felt like it was going to have this huge impact on the company. When I really, when I sit back and look at those decisions, I realize what was more important was that I acted on it early. Because if I decided to just do nothing, then nothing would really change. And he's like, it's very rare that I look back at any action I took and it had a significant negative impact on my business. And so I found that for me, it was more important to err on the side of acting versus holding. And I think I agree with you, that I think becomes so critical and the biggest component to driving this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll give you a simple example. Like Capital One's a bank, and banks aren't necessarily notorious for being change agents and being innovative. But if you think about Capital One, the way the organization is built and structured is basically to ensure that change management's like a core competency in the business and their ability to adapt to change. So they've got lots of different business lines in the company, and they're all sort of constantly scanning the horizon and constantly examining internally how they can get better or be different in ways that customers want. And so, and arguably they've got a track record of being able to do that through their different, either credit card offerings or banking offerings or now investing offerings. Those different type of things that have all across the years have really helped them innovate when they at a national level when they really don't have a national physical presence.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm stuck. Okay. So how do we become more agile? And if you look, there's a lot of models out there, but I think this one is kind of it's a simple, easy to understand in terms of the ways that you kind of ease yourself into it. So usually, one of the easiest ways to start becoming more agile is to do something physical, like a physical change, and to impact a process, or a tool, and start really, really small. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you automate, from course creation to uploading into the LMS, or you have some other process that takes you a really long time and you automate that. Like there's this new tool out there that Rob and I, have been looking on. It's called Cognota, and its job is to automate a lot of the learning operations in the back end. So like using tools like that, and even if it's automating one thing and just starting with that. And then once you get success there, then looking more into the infrastructure of your company, the strategy, the behavior, your measurement practices. So you have this little start. Now you start thinking, okay, how can I blow this out throughout my entire organization, but not just focus on an actual process, but how can I create a strategy or make some type of behavior change or start measuring something differently so that we can start to scale that. So it doesn't come from the same source every time. We're now starting to think in that way. And then ending, which is the very hardest thing to do, is to have your people, it's the biggest change, it's the hardest change to make, and it's to change the mindset and the values of your people to become more agile. This has the biggest impact on the entire organization. Automating one process itself isn't going to change the name of your company or make you more competitive. But if the mindset of your organization, if the values of your people are all with an agile mindset and they all truly believe and live up to the ideas of trying to be agile, that is where your biggest changes set to happen. Now, again, so when you look at this pyramid, it's like easiest to hardest. But if I look at the importance, I would say, it's like least important to most important as well. I did see I had a hand raise. I just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, just while you're doing that, Nolan, I'd agree. I think that, that the most time from an L&D perspective, is particularly if you're in a leadership role in L&D, has to be really on spending around building and reinforcing a mindset in your team. And I think what's really important about that is that your attitude kind of has to be that everything we built can be disposable.
Yeah.
And nothing is sacred, which is really hard, particularly when you've worked hard to put something in place and you feel really good about it. And, everybody feels a sense of accomplishment, for example, when they have something that's successful in their organization. I think the trick is taking a moment and recognizing that and being, taking the satisfaction out of that. Yet at the same time, not necessarily staying satisfied with that. Because I think looking for ways that you can disrupt yourself to get even better, or that anticipation piece that becomes really important in terms of looking forward and thinking about, great, this might have a shelf life of 12 months, but then really next year we're going to need to think differently about this. So what do we do then? And how do you instill the mindset in your team for them to really be thinking about the way they get things done and how they get things done, and maybe be less sacred about it? I remember I used to have a lot of conversations with instructional designers, and I said, everything you learned in school is great. And, I love the theory and the value and everything behind instructional design. But here it's like a baseline for your knowledge. It's not necessarily the process you need to follow. So, your analysis phase might last 5 minutes in a hallway. And you need to recognize that, and have that kind of mindset that I just need enough to go. And I don't need to, do, a 1,000-person interview kind of format like I learned in school. So I think that mindset piece is like super important and really important in terms of where learning leaders especially, spend their time instilling and empowering the mindset of the team to be able to go after these strategies, behaviors, and processes and tools.
And so if we look at, specifically, and just a reminder, sorry for the, somebody raised their hand that, please, write in questions. It's in the side panel there. You should see a question tab. Please feel free to message there if you have any questions. So if we look at specifically in L&D, what are some things we can do? I think in every webinar, I hate to just talk theory, although that's the most widest practical application. I like to say, okay, let's actually get down and figure out, what are the things that we're seeing? What are some of the things that our clients are doing or that we're recommending? And I've broke it into four buckets here, which is the same buckets that we looked at the top that Accenture had provided. So looking at leadership effectiveness, I think, the very first thing, in your journey to becoming more agile, the leaders of your organization or your department, right? If it's an entire organization, the C-suite obviously, but this can happen within an L&D organization, getting the leaders, getting the managers and attending an agility workshop and just understanding what it means and getting everybody in that room on the same page, I think is really important. The workshop is not necessarily so much as to help, define agility and all of that, because I think everybody would kind of have their own ideas, and it's not really to introduce agility even, it's to make sure that everybody that leaves that room is on the same page. This is what Agile means to us. This is the importance of agility, so that everybody and spark a dialogue. Would we apply this? I think that is really key. And I think maybe if you do nothing else, one of the most important things that you could do. And then the second is to promote the Agile ideas. Rob had talked about how that action point becomes the pivot point for many companies becoming Agile, when they're just saying, if you're saying you want to be Agile, but then you get an idea from your team that might seem ludicrous, but it is Agile, immediately shutting that down or not investing in that becomes against that culture. And so promoting Agile ideas, as a leader, is super important, and encouraging people to come up with those ideas and collaborate with cross-functional teams. I think this is a huge one when you look at agility. We talked about one of the big drivers and one of the best ways you can actually be agile, and the reasons for being agile, is to shorten the feedback loop. And in the learning department, the feedback loop is usually employee, here you could replace employees, partners, customers, whoever it is, but collaborating with, I don't know, the head of sales or as a salesperson, and understanding, okay, what is your world like? What are your challenges? What are your struggles? Understanding what their world is and sharing some of your challenges actually opens you up to these new ideas that help you become more agile minded, I think, and it helps you identify areas in which you can become more agile.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things here, Nolan, I would add to. One is, that, leadership effectiveness is also sort of thinking about the big leadership in your organization as well. And how agile does the organization expect you to be? So I think that that's a really important piece, because you can be super agile and super innovative in your L&D organization, but if the rest of your organization doesn't move at pace with you, then you can create a disconnect there, and or it may not actually matter. And to your point about collaborating with cross-functional teams, I think that's a good place to sort of get a read on people's expectations around agility, and how they expect you to be agile as an L&D organization. I think also the other thing is that, to your point, those relationships cross-functionally become super important, because you can get, amazing insights from people sitting outside your function about your function.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember sitting in, meetings and somebody sitting there saying, I don't understand why you guys just don't, and then, sort of complete the sentence from there, around some particular way we were delivering a service to a particular function. And it was like, well, because we hadn't really thought about that, or, having the courage to say, well, we hadn't really thought about that, or, honestly, we're so obsessed with doing, with building out our e-learning curriculum that we hadn't really thought about, virtual or whatever it might be. So I think that that's, that cross-functional input and that cross-functional perspective is super, super helpful in terms of gauging the temperature of the rest of the organization around how agile you really need to be.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And then comes, I think, to the next, right? I think you come into that. Okay, so now as a leadership team, we've become more, agile, or starting to. So what are the things we can do as an organization? I think one of the best things you can do is to, meet other people in your field and understand how they work. To understand how their organization is set up, come to them with your pain points and your challenges, and learning from what others are doing is really, really important. I think that's, why Rob is so valuable to many of our clients, is that he has experience that is so diverse, from retail and tech and consumer brands and everything. And being able to say, for this organization, this seemed to work, because there's no one way to structure your organization to be agile. It's going to rely on a lot of different things, and what agile means is going to be different. So just understanding what options are out there, right? With options come choice, and I think that's important. And then I put, sorry, 2 and 3 got merged together, but I always say, experiment with centralized or decentralized teams. I think this debate will go on for years and years and years about whether there should be a centralized L&D team that every business comes to, or whether there should be L&D teams within each of those business units. Experiment with which one of those works or maybe doesn't work. But that's always a very good place to start and say, I wonder if we were to change that up, what would that look like? Rob, you're laughing. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah,
if you
well,
have an opinion on it, or if you've debated this
I
forever.
got I have 30 plus years of learning and development, and this is always a bullet on a slide every year. So I think that here's what I would say to this one around experimenting is experimenting with ways to better match your team to the way your organization works, right? So centralized L&D teams work really well where organizations have centralized largely the functions that that it has within it. So if you have centralized marketing, centralized finance, centralized HR, centralized ops, it would make sense you should probably have centralized L&D. But if you have decentralized models around that, then it probably makes sense actually that you're more decentralized, right? Or somewhere in between from a hybrid, people call it federated, which really is a fancy name for decentralized. It's translated to mean I'm decentralized, but I'm trying to maintain control. And we call that federated. And so I think that, thinking about those pieces is really important. And then I'll just add on this slide too, this organizational adaptability piece. I got huge value out of other L&D leaders and other organizations. And I'll give you a simple example. I learned something from the person at the time that was the chief learning and talent officer at Comcast about how they were how they were helping field technicians learn. That completely changed my mindset around how I might be able to solve a particular problem in McDonald's restaurants, to the point where that solution is now in more than 20,000 restaurants around the world with more than 1 million people using it as a solution. But I probably wouldn't have conceived that idea by looking within. And so looking out at and having relationships with other leaders and hearing about some successes that they're having or failures that they're having, frankly, are super valuable too, is a really good way to then turn inside your organization and experiment.
And I think that's, I think point 4 becomes connected to all of that. And I kind of summarized it up with that. And as I was, putting these together, remove all preconceived notions, right? I mean, thinking that, as you just said, what does Comcast and training people that are going door to door have to do with serving a burger in a restaurant? I really think it's important to think when you're in an agile way and when you're looking at your organization to remove these preconceived notions of what you think your organization should be or how your organization should be ran or how your organization has been ran. And so if you have that open mindset, you can make some actions.
Yeah, I think that one gets really hard because we traditionally are creators of things, and people feel really precious about the things that we create, which makes it hard for us to let go, which I say is could be our Achilles heel when it comes to agility otherwise.
Yeah, and so then comes the what I think most people when they think yeah, I'm agile, I just bought tool XYZ. I'd say this is kind of the fun area. So I've put some things here that I've seen L&D organizations do. Maybe you have some others, Rob, as well. But when it comes to innovation within what you're doing, try to create a profit center. We worked with a large pharma company, and they said we know that the demand for Zoom training, for Teams training, for presentation skills in our company is going to go through the roof, and we're going to end up paying some vendor to do this every time. Why don't we create a solution and actually just, charge our employees to do this like we would be charging somebody else. And so they were actually able to create a profit center within the organization that was still much less expensive than going outside, but being able to show that value back. And they did it all as a pure ROI initiative. They came to us and they said, okay, Infopro Learning, what would it cost for you to fully manage and maintain this and deliver? And okay, as long as we're charging X dollars back, we can actually turn this into a profitable venture for us. So I thought that was a really unique one. A lot of companies do point to, since I'm in the Northwest, Nike comes to mind. I've been to a couple different of their like innovation showcases, where they put on for their entire L&D team. They bring in vendors, they bring in people within their organization, and they just set up booths and have people walk around and showcase what innovation did you do, what innovation did you do, what are you doing in your org. I thought that was a really cool thing. I know many companies have these kinds of things. And then the third is, again, kind of, I think, the no-brainer. Experiment with technology. Technology
Yeah.
drives a lot of this innovation. What I tried to do in the point 1 and 2 was to say, don't just take the easy way out. Don't just don't just go buy a SaaS product and say, I'm agile, I'm innovating. There's other ways that you can do it that sometimes are maybe a lot harder, but might have a much bigger payoff.
Yeah, my take on the profit center thing is sort of proceed carefully, because really what you're doing is you're being funded by other functions in your business.
Correct. Correct.
So you have to assume there's a demand, and two, you have to assume there's a budget. So I think that what we've always tried to do is be very selective about the things we charge back for,
Mm-hmm.
and then sort of build a model that says we're trying to charge at cost, basically.
Yep.
Um, and ultimately, you do create a profit center. So if you think about instructor-led classes and you have to set a cost per head, you're going to set an assumption on how many people, and if you exceed that example of how many, that number of how many people, naturally that creates a bit of a profit center. And really, what that enables you to do is unlock and do other innovation things, particularly around number 3, where you can experiment with new technologies and new ideas. And I think this idea of a learner innovation showcase, or just learning innovation showcase for L&D folks, is really important. A few companies I work with that are startups have actually been able to participate in a few learner innovation showcases. I had one company I worked with just do it at Starbucks, for example. And it's not about a sales call. It's more about like, show me what you're doing, show me, how your customers are using this product. And then really a discussion amongst our team about, well, what can we do with this? And, what does this idea mean for us? And is it a big idea, or is it an interesting idea we should keep close on the side? So those kind of things really sort of help drive what innovation looks like, and how you can disrupt your current ways of doing things.
Yeah, and I do think on the the experiment with new technology, kind of on that bit, I think if something that I do all the time is if there's a SaaS product or something, I'll just ask for a demo. I mean, even just knowing it is out there, I think opens your mind up. Knowing that it's there, I think you don't have to buy. Again, one of my favorite things to do, like you just said, Rob, is to say, okay, who, um, I go to a vendor and I say, who are the clients that you have that would be like us? Can I talk to them and just understand how they're using the software? It's in their best interest to do so. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing you can do. So, and then the last one is deliver agility. This is, again, I think when businesses hear agility, and if we look back at that triangle, usually this is the easy one, I think, to point to. So here what we're talking, some ideas: increase the percentage of variable costs within your delivery organization. We talked about this on the talent side. One of the big ways that organizations are doing this is by saying, I'm going to shrink my team to, the thinkers and the strategizers and everything like that. But the actual team that I have to deliver on the solutions that I'm outlining, to deliver the classes or to design the courses or facilitate the sessions, I'm going to use either, contractors, I'm going to use an outsourced vendor. Although my cost might be a little bit higher for each individual transaction, I'm only paying them for what I use. So I don't have to worry about keeping these people busy as demand goes up or as demand goes down. There's lots of other ways to do that as well. That's just, when we talk about increasing the percentage of variable cost, that's really what we're seeing as the most popular option.
Yep. Yeah, no,
Good.
yeah, I agree on this piece around, rethinking about your overall sort of infrastructure, I would say overall,
Yeah.
right? And thinking about fixed versus variable cost. It's a great way to engage your CFO, and understanding what's most important to them when they look at and think about your L&D budget. And that is, if I move to a more variable cost model, will you support it? Which is really important to know on the front end, because if you move to a variable cost model, you're lowering your fixed costs, and a lot of organizations base their budgets for L&D on the fixed cost side. So,
Yep.
so you have to be super transparent about that up front, but it can make a huge difference in terms of the outside in innovation you can bring to your team, as well as your ability to sort of scale up the delivery piece, create more content, deliver more programs, whatever it might be, than you might have possibly been able to do with just a fixed existing team.
Absolutely. And so then we talk about, point 2 is, again, maybe one of your no-brainers: migrate delivery team to Agile. I know we have so many articles out there on Agile versus ADDIE, how to deliver in Agile, how to manage a project Agile versus Waterfall. There's a lot of resources out there. If you're just looking for insight, we'd be happy to share some. But what we're talking about here is the actual delivery. When you're doing your project management of these, you do so in an Agile way, and there's a very specific playbook out there, training programs, that you can do. You can also just take baby steps, just again, finding something that you do in the delivery of your organization and find a way to streamline it, automate it, whatever it is. You don't necessarily have to shift your whole organization to some Agile delivery framework. You can look at an individual project and just think, how can I become more agile? And point 3 is, again, kind of the big one. It's just reimagine the way that work gets done. Just because the work is being done one way doesn't mean so. Think of what would the opposite be. Whatever assumptions that you have in your business and how you deliver, try to imagine what it would look like if you didn't. So I can give one example for my personal life here at Infopro. As we say, what if we, what would it look like if we didn't have a sales team at all? If clients just came to us and we connected them directly to the people doing the project and just allowed them to work. Do we really even need people to do that and to be at that function anymore? If we're able to educate people on what we do and our services, do we even need that center for us? So, and there's many such things. Rob, I don't know if you have any that are examples that are come to mind where you're like, maybe we didn't pull the trigger on it, but we had this idea of completely reimagining how the work got done. It was great, but maybe for whatever reason we did it or we didn't do it.
Yeah, no, I think that it's a healthy habit to have, to constantly be thinking about the way work is done and thinking about different ways of getting work done. I can think about this all the time in terms of, how you leverage subject matter experts in your organization, and even the sort of the creator culture that we have today around TikTok and Instagram and those kind of things. So what does the creator culture look like from a learning and development perspective inside your organization? So thinking about the shift from L&D being the creators of content to L&D being the enablers of creation of content, right? Those kind of things fundamentally start to reframe the way you think completely about how your work gets done.
And so if we move on, what are some, and I realize we're kind of coming close on time, so maybe we'll skip through some of these, but I think if you were to look at, I think a lot of these pitfalls are pretty simple. I think the first, one for me, if I look at what is the biggest, it's failing to get buy-in. I think if you don't understand, if you personally understand why it's important to be agile, but you're not able to get others involved, you're going to lose the point of it at the end of the day. If you constantly have to be the driver to say become more agile or use this technology or leverage this tool or collaborate with other teams, if you have to be the center of agility every time, then maybe not the center, but if you have to be the only person on an island, it's not going to work. The amount of effort that you have to put in is not going to be worth it. If you can't get buy-in up front, it's really hard to seed an actual organizational change. And again, within the L&D organization or organization as a whole as well, if you can't get buy-in, and the best way to do it is to start at the top. Start with your most senior people, find some champions, kind of work your way in. To me, if I were to say what is the one pitfall, it's again, get all of your leaders in a workshop, discuss the reason that we're doing this, and get buy-in before you do anything else. That's what stands out to me. Rob, what stands out to you?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. The buy-in piece, I think, goes back to my comments about sort of matching the needs of your organization. So I think there's, a couple things here. Are changes you're looking to make what people expect and what people are looking for from you? And, how well will it set you up to more closely match the needs of what the business wants?
Mm-hmm. 100%. And so with that, we actually are done with the presentation. I when Rob and I were discussing this, we said, I don't think we'll take that long, but I think it was a good engaging conversation and back and forth. So happy, if anybody has questions, please do put those into the question pane. I'll answer those as they come in. While that's happening though, I'm going to put into chat, if you're looking to get in touch with us, I think I actually have this as well. I'm going to put our email ID there. And then I'm also going to get Rob's LinkedIn, or Rob, if you have that, I don't know if you'll be able to share it in the chat, but I'll also put that in the chat as well. Rob is an absolute amazing resource for you. Again, if we talk about many of the ways to become agile, a lot of them have to do with just kind of opening up your mind to becoming more agile. And conversations with Rob is a great way to start that.
Yep, Nolan, I put it in the chat, but I can't
Yeah,
share with
there you go. I just shared it with everyone
There you go.
there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Wonderful. And I don't think we have any questions coming in. So let me check. Boom, boom, boom. Yep. So what we'll do then, thanks again, Rob. I really appreciate you joining us today. And thanks everybody else for joining as well. We had an amazing session. Really appreciate everybody coming into the webinar today. Again, be on the lookout in the next, I would say by Monday or Tuesday of next week, you're going to have an email from us. It's going to have all the information related to the event, the recording, everything of that nature. And again, if anybody wants to get in touch with us, you can see some information about us here on the slide. It's also there in the chat. With that, thank you so much for the amazing session today, and we look forward to seeing you all on the next webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.